Hey, fifth grade. Today, this video is going to review order of operations and expressions. Last week, we talked about this during Wednesday, and we've been reviewing it some in class, and we'll continue to review it. We just wanted to test your knowledge this week and see how much that you've learned about order of operations and expressions. So we are going to start by talking about the properties of multiplication. And there are four types of properties. When we talk about these, they are the commutative, the associative, the multiplicative identity, and the distributive property. The commutative property is when two numbers are multiplied together and you're going to get the same product regardless of the order in which they are multiplied. For example, 4 times 2 is the same thing as 2 times 4. Either way, I get 8. The associative property is when 3 or more numbers are multiplied. The product is the same regardless of the grouping of the factors. For example, I could multiply 2 times 3 times 4 and still get the same thing as 3 times 4 plus times 2 because we know that we have to solve the parentheses part of it first. The multiplicative identity property just says that any number multiplied by 1 is going to get the original number as the answer. For example, 5 times 1, 6 times 1, 7 times 1, 5 times 1 is 5, 6 times 1 is 6, 7 times 1 is 7. You guys all know your one's multiplication fact. And then last but not least, we have the distributive property. And the distributive property says the sum of two numbers times a third is equal to the sum of each add-in times the third number. For example, 4 times parentheses 6 plus 3 is the same thing as 4 times 6 plus 4 times 3. We are going to go ahead and move on into solving order of operations today. When we solve order of operations, we want to remember to use please excuse my dear Aunt Sally or Jim's as a way to remember the way in which we solve. So for the word gems, we have GEMS, and the G stands for grouping symbols, E stands for exponents, the M stands for multiplication or division, and the S stands for subtraction or addition. So it's going to look something like this, and we have to remember that for multiplication or addition and addition or subtraction, we have to remember to solve whichever one comes first when we read the problem from left to right. So that is important to remember there as well. For Pemdas, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. It's really the same thing, just with more letters. So the P stands for parentheses, the E is exponents, multiplication or division, and then addition or subtraction. And this time I'm going to make sure to write those left and rights on there as well so we can remember that that's the order in which we solve. A good practice is to write Pemdas or gems down and kind of check off as you go to make sure that you're solving them in the correct order. If you consistently use that, you will get questions correct every single time. So the first one that we are going to look at looks like this. So I have 3 plus parentheses 16 divided by 4. In this problem, what am I going to have to solve first? If you said parentheses, then you are correct. I have to solve 16 divided by 4 first. And I know that 16 divided by 4 is 4. So what I always like to do is I draw these arrows underneath to make sure that I know what I've solved and what the answer was. And then best practice is going to be to rewrite that equation again. So 3 plus would go in front of the 4. And then last but not least, I know that 3 plus 4 is 7, which would be my final answer to this problem. All right. The next problem I want us to look at is 4 times 12 minus 20. And in this problem here, what am I going to do first? I have multiplication and subtraction. And if you said multiplication, that is correct. I'm going to have to do 4 times 12 first, which when I do that, I get 48. And then again, I'm going to rewrite my problem, 48 minus 20. So take a minute to figure out what 48 minus 20 is. And when you subtract both of those, you should get the answer 28 for that one.
Today we're going to be reviewing expressions. Those of you that need a reminder, an expression is simply a number sentence. It contains numbers, operations, and sometimes symbols. The difference between an expression and an equation is that an expression does not have an equal sign, whereas an equation does. Now, in order to best prepare us for writing expressions when we're given a phrase in word form is being able to identify which operation we need to use. So looking up at my chart here, I gave some examples of different words or phrases that you can see, and you have to be able to correspond it with the correct operation. Now, for most of us, being able to simplify an expression is pretty easy, but when it comes to rewriting an expression from word form into a number sentence with numbers and operations, it gets a little bit tricky. So if you need to, go ahead and pause the video and maybe write down some of these words and phrases so that you know which operation it corresponds to. So let's go ahead and look at my first example here. We're going to write the phrases below as an expression. So remember, when we are taking a phrase such as this and we are rewriting it as an expression with operations, symbols, and numbers, we have to look and identify the key words. So when we look at 8 less than 21, less than is my key word. So we have to think, what operation does this correspond with? And hopefully you know that less than is taking something away, so it would be subtraction. Now, we have the operation, but less than, 8 less than 21. Well, what are we starting with in this expression? We're starting with 21, and we're taking 8 away. This is 8 less than 21. Now, for my second example here, the product of 30 and 9, again, we have to identify what is the key word here to match, to correspond the correct operation. And hopefully, you guys with your teacher have been talking about this word product, and we should know at this point that product is the answer to a multiplication problem. So that means I'm going to have to multiply 30 and 9 together to rewrite this expression. 30 times 9. So the product of 30 and 9 would look like that as an expression when I rewrite. Go ahead and do another example together. So looking at this phrase, again, I have to rewrite the expression based off what I'm reading. So what's important here is, again, pulling out those key words that I had shown you the list of before and being able to correspond the correct operation with it. 14 less than the product of 2 and 13. So hopefully you're able to recognize that in this expression, we actually have 2 operations going on here. Less than means to subtract. Product means to multiply. But if you remember from our last example, whenever we see less than, the order switches. We're not taking the product of 2 and 13 away from 14. We're taking 14 away from the product of 2 and 3. So that means I need to solve for the product of these 2 numbers first. So when I rewrite it as 2 times 13, and that will show for my product. And then 14 less than that, I would take it away at the end. Now, it's important to recognize that we are just simply rewriting the expression from the phrase with word form into an expression with just operations, symbols, and numbers. We're not simplifying it because nowhere in this did it tell us to simplify. And that's a very important thing to remember when you are working on a test or a week by week. If it says to write an expression and it doesn't say to simplify, this is what it should look like. Now, if we think about our order of operations, we have to think, well, do I have to add parentheses around the first step I need to take according to my expression here? In this case, the first step I want to do is multiply, and the second step I want to do is subtract. So we don't technically need parentheses, but if we wanted to, we could add the parentheses around the first step that we want to do to make sure it gets done first, because in order of operations, parentheses is always the first step when solving. Let's go ahead and do one last example together. So again, we're going to write the phrase as an expression. 2 times the difference of 5 and 3. So first I want to identify what are my keywords here. Times I know corresponds with multiplication. And difference I know corresponds with subtraction. So I have 2 operations that I need to use when I rewrite this expression. I need to use multiplication and I need to use subtraction. But I also have to think, in which order do I have to write this out? 2 times the difference of 5 and 3. The difference of 5 and 3. Well, I know again, difference means to subtract. So I'm going to subtract 3 from 5. And then I'm going to multiply it by 2. Again, I'm not solving anything. I'm not simplifying. I am simply rewriting it using numbers, operations, and symbols. Now, I could stop here, but hopefully you recognize, because using our order of operations, Pemdas or GEMS, that right now, as it is, the first step I would be simplifying, if I were to, would be 3 times 2. That's not what this expression reads. So I have to go in and I have to put parentheses around the step that I want to do first to ensure that if I were to simplify it, it gets done first, and so that it matches the expression up here. So I need to add parentheses around 5 and 3 so that the first thing I would do if I simplified is I would find the difference, and then I would multiply it by 2. Without the parentheses, you would have been multiplying 3 times 2 first and taking that away from 5, which does not match the expression we have written up here. Again, as always, if you guys have any questions, make sure that you're asking your teacher.